All right, we are going to start the program now. So our first guest, I'm going to introduce in both Amharic and in English. Lij Nebyat Aklilu Demessie በአሜሪካን ሀገር ተወልዶ ያደገ አማርኛን አቀላጥፎ የሚናገር የሚጽፍ እንዲሁም በኢትዮጵያዊነቱ እጅግ የሚኮራ ወጣት ነው። በትምህርት ዘርፍ አን አርበር ሚሽጋን ከሚገኘው ስመጥሩና ታዋቂው ዩኒቨርሲቲ ኦፍ ሚሽጋን የባችለርስ እና የማስተርስ ዲግሪዎች ይዟል። ላለፉት 13 ዓመታት በሆስፒታል አድሚኒስትሬሽን በፋርማሲውቲካል እና የጤና መድህን ተቋማት ውስጥ በማኔጅመንት እስከ ዳይሬክተርነት ሰርቷል። ኒውዮርክ ከተማ ውስጥ ለትልቅ መድህን ኩባንያ ዳይሬክተር ሆኖ ይሰራል። በማህበራዊ ተሳትፎም በኩል የላቀ አስተዋጽኦ አበርክቷል። የግርማዊ ቀዳማዊ አፄ ኃይለ ሥላሴ ሐውልት የአፍሪካ ህብረት ውስጥ እንዲቆም ስላሴ ስታንድ አፕ ኢንክ የተሰኘውን ፓን አፍሪካዊ ድርጅት በመመሰረት ካለመታከት በኢትዮጵያ መንግስትና በአፍሪካ ህብረት ላይ ከፍተኛ ተጽዕኖ በመፍጠር ግርማዊ ቀዳማዊ አፄ ኃይለ ሥላሴ የሚገባቸውን ስፍራ እንዲይዙ በማድረግ የተነሳበትን ዓላማ አሳክቷል። በልዑል ኤርሚያስ ኃይለ ሥላሴ የሚመራውን የሞአንበሳ ተቋም የህዝብ ግንኙነት ኃላፊ በመሆን የኢትዮጵያ አኩሪ ታሪክ ባህልና እሴቶቿን በማስጠበቅና በማስተዋወቅም ይሰራል። በአያቱ በአርበኛው ሻለቃ ለማ ወልደ ጻዲቅ መታሰቢያ ድርጅት ስምም የኢትዮጵያ ጥንታዊ ሰንደቅ ዓላማ እንዲመለስ ህዝባዊ ድጋፍ በማሰባሰብና ህዝባችንን በማንቃት ኢትዮጵያዊነትን ለማስከበር የበኩሉን ድርሻ እየተወጣ ይገኛል። Lij Nebyat Aklilu Demessie is proud of his Ethiopian heritage. Despite being born and raised in the United States, Lij Nebyat speaks and writes fluently in the Amharic language. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree from the highly reputable University of Michigan. For the past 13 years, Lij Nebyat has gained management experience working in hospital administration, pharmaceutics, and medical insurance. He's based in New York City and currently works as a director for one of the largest insurance companies worldwide. Lij Nebyat also has a strong record in community service. He established a Pan-African organization called Selassie Stand Up Inc. and led a movement that successfully led to the erection of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Haile Selassie's statue in the African Union headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Lij Nebyat also serves as the public relations officer for the Moanbessa Institute, which is led by His Imperial Highness Prince Ermias Haile Selassie. Lij Nebyat has also recently launched an initiative under the Major Lemma Memorial Foundation to restore the traditional Ethiopian flag, which millions of Ethiopians, including those massacred by Graziani, have died defending to ensure Ethiopia's sovereignty and independence. Please welcome Lij Nebyat.
Thank you so much, Orion, for that very kind and generous introduction. I actually flew in from LA, and I was planning on going into the weeds of the victory of the Battle of Adwa, how it inspired Ethiopianism, how also anti-Ethiopianism as a byproduct emerged from that. But then I thought, okay, well, there's probably a varying level of knowledge in regards to the Battle of Adwa itself. So I thought, maybe I'll take a different approach and talk generally about the history and the culture of Ethiopia. So with that said, I first would like to thank the community here in Michigan. It's a pleasure to be back. I went to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, so this is my first time in Grand Rapids, but definitely not my first time in Michigan. My sister also finished her PhD, Dr. Nebyat Demessie, a joint PhD in political science and public policy at the University of Michigan. And back in 2005, we actually organized a briefing in the aftermath of the Coalition for Unity Democracy. There was an opposition party that challenged the government of Ethiopia. It was Ethiopia's first democratically held elections. The opposition won by a landslide. And the very next day, and even leading up to the election, thousands were imprisoned and killed. And so we thought that it was important to host a briefing. A lot of the political science professors at Michigan, I believe, I think at that time Al Gore may have been running for presidency, if I'm not mistaken. There was talks of some of them being appointed and possibly getting a White House appointment, so we thought it would make sense to host a briefing. And I see professors here who partook in that. Professor Asaf Amuratu generously attended as a panelist. Professor Sisa Asaf from Western Michigan. The late Professor Toshoma Wagau from University of Michigan as well. Professor Salamun Adis Getaun also attended as well, so it was a very well attended event. Having stated that, let me jump right into the presentation here. As I'm sure many of you already know, Ethiopia is an ancient country. It's the origin of humanity and the cradle of civilization. As a matter of fact, an international team of scientists from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History, and this is important to me because I actually was born and raised in Cleveland, discovered an ancestral species that existed about 3.3 to 3.5 million years ago, named Australopithecus derimida from the Afar region in Ethiopia. This species is believed to have lived alongside Australopithecus afarensis, otherwise known as Lucy, which was also discovered by scientists from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History in 1974. Thus, Ethiopia's history stretches back millennia into the beginning of times. Geographically, as I'm sure most of you know, Ethiopia is located in what's called the Horn of Africa in the northeastern part, bordered by Eritrea to the north, Djibouti to the northeast, Somalia to the east, Kenya to the south, South Sudan and Sudan to the west. And the population in Ethiopia is over 112 million people. It's the second most populous nation in Africa and among the fastest growing economies in the region. Given that we're assembled in a church here today, I would be remiss not to mention that Ethiopia is also home to three major Abrahamic faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Ethiopia is also mentioned, I believe, over 45 times in the Bible, and it's also mentioned in the Holy Quran. The eunuch who met with Philip the evangelist when he traveled to Jerusalem is among the first people to convert and spread the gospel. So he took the message back to Ethiopia, and Ethiopians were among the first Christians. The earlier followers of the Islamic faith, in order to escape from persecution, were instructed by the Prophet Muhammad himself to seek refuge in Abyssinia or in Ethiopia, which he defined as a land where just kings lived. And as a result, the Prophet Muhammad mandated that no jihad or holy war should be waged against Ethiopia. Unfortunately, adherents of the Islamic faith, many years after, did not follow these orders, and holy wars were waged by Islamic forces such as the Ottoman Empire, the Mahdists in Sudan, the Adal Sultanates in the eastern part of Ethiopia and Somalia, and also Somalia itself, although perhaps it took more of a political orientation in the 70s. Efforts were also made by missionaries and colonialists such as the Portuguese to convert the majority of Ethiopians who practice the Tawahedo or the Coptic Orthodox faith, Christian faith, to Catholicism. This arrangement actually happened, I believe, in the 16th century when the Ottoman Turks, or the Adal Sultanates, which was an Islamic empire backed by the Ottoman Turks, attacked Ethiopia. Since they were using, at that time, more modern weaponry to defeat the Ethiopian army, it was necessary for Emperor David, and I believe it was also Emperor Galaudios, his son, if I'm not mistaken, that reached out to the Portuguese as a counterbalance, looking for military assistance. And part of that conditionality was for the Ethiopians to convert to Catholicism, and Catholicism became a state religion. But then Emperor Fasilides, this was actually moving in the 17th century. Emperor Susunios resorted in adopting Catholicism as a state religion. His son then, due to the opposition, reversed that decision. Jesuits were then expelled from Ethiopia. I believe they were perhaps reinstated by Emperor Selassie, if I'm not mistaken, many years later, and then the Coptic Orthodox faith was reinstated as part of a state religion as well. So despite several attempts throughout history by foreign entities to fundamentally alter the essence of Ethiopianism. It's really the unrelenting spirit of the Ethiopian people that has always prevailed, and that's what we see also through the Battle of Adwa, where Emperor Menelik was able to galvanize the Ethiopian people to fight, in defense of their religion, the sovereignty of Ethiopia as well. It would be remiss of me as an Ethiopian, also as a member of the Crown Council of Ethiopia, to not bring up the fact that Ethiopian history and the mere existence of our identity cannot be explained without mentioning the Ethiopian Solomonic monarchy. This history, it's a fascinating history, extends back over thousands of years and starts with the Queen of Sheba's encounter with King Solomon of Israel and the child they bore named Menelik I, who's the first of the Solomonic line of emperors to rule in Ethiopia, which should not be confused with Emperor Menelik II, who is credited with uniting Ethiopians in the victory at the Battle of Adwa in 1896, successfully maintaining Ethiopian sovereignty and independence during the First Italo-Ethiopian War. It's believed that King Menelik I visited his father, King Solomon, in Israel and brought back with him the Ark of the Covenant, of which a replica exists in every Ethiopian Orthodox church, including those built in the United States. It's a prerequisite for a church to have what we call a tabot, or a replica of the Ark. Prior to the adoption of Christianity, Ethiopia was a monotheistic nation where Beta Israelis, or Ethiopian Jews, believed to have migrated to Ethiopia after the destruction of the first temple in Jerusalem. There are many cities and towns, interestingly, in Ethiopia that are also in Israel that have the same name, and there are biblical references in which Israel and Ethiopia are mentioned several times throughout the Bible and also in the Quran as well. The majority of Ethiopian Jews, through Operation Moses and Operation Solomon, have since moved to Israel, where the population of Ethiopian Jews now is in excess of 100,000. So although Ethiopians were among the first believers and adopters of the Christian faith, it wasn't until the 4th century AD, which was still prior to the adoption of Christianity by most countries in Europe, that the Ethiopian monarchy integrated Christianity as a state religion in Ethiopia. The Solomonic monarchs thus became defenders of the Orthodox faith, as Orthodox Christianity became integrated within Ethiopia's sectarian political system of governance. The Fetah Negast, or the law and justice of the kings, which the Christian faith served as its philosophical underpinning, was drafted as Ethiopia's first constitution. So the philosophical underpinning of Ethiopia's first constitution emanates from the belief in Christianity and from Christianity itself, and it was used by the kings to govern the people as a form of law until more modern constitutions were implemented in 1930, and then amendments were made in 1955. Monarchs, emperors, empresses, kings, and queens from the Solomonic line prevailed in Ethiopia until 1974, when a socialist military coup murderously assassinated 60 officials of Emperor Haile Selassie's cabinet and high-ranking military officers. The emperor, this is Emperor Haile Selassie, who most are familiar with. He went on several state visits throughout the world, came to America several times as well in the 50s and subsequent to that as well. He was the 225th direct descendant from the line of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. The emperor himself was imprisoned and later assassinated by the Derg in September of 1975. So this was after the assassination of the 60 high officials and military personnel during the socialist takeover in Ethiopia. So that essentially effectively ended monarchical rule in Ethiopia. Luckily, Emperor Haile Selassie's eldest son, Crown Prince Asfa Wesson, Haile Selassie, later crowned emperor in exile, Amha Selassie, was abroad when the coup took place and was able to establish the Crown Council of Ethiopia and the Mo'ambasa, or the Lion of Judah, as entities established to promote and preserve the history, traditions, and culture of Ethiopia's Solomonic monarchy. Historically, the Crown Council was established and existed to provide guidance, counsel, and advisory services to reigning Ethiopian monarchs. Although an ancient entity, the legal basis of the Crown Council in its current form comes from the 1955 Constitution, which created it in a modern legal context. The present government of Ethiopia continues to recognize it as a validly constitutionally created body and refers to it currently as the Crown of Ethiopia in exile, while acknowledging its framework under the presidency of His Imperial Highness Lu'ul, or Prince Ermias, As a result of its constitutional legality, the Crown Council then remains an Ethiopian identity, albeit functioning largely outside of Ethiopia. His Imperial Highness, Prince Ermias Haile Selassie, is the grandson of Emperor Haile Selassie and Empress Menen Asfaw, and the son of Prince Haile Selassie and Princess Mahasan Mariam. He's the 229th direct descendant of the line and was appointed as president of the Crown Council of Ethiopia by his uncle, Emperor Ammaha Selassie, who I just mentioned. Prince Ermias also functions as the sovereign of the Solomonic Imperial Orders and Investitures. He's based in the Washington, D.C. area. The Crown Council, in honor of the victory at the Battle of Adwa, hosts a yearly event. We also, in recent times, commemorate the victory at Gondar in London as well. In fact, the plaque was inaugurated not too long ago, I think a couple of years back. And this was a commemoration of the first Allied victory against fascism and Nazism during the World War. The Crown Council hosts these type of events quite often. We also are invited frequently on state visits. I've traveled personally as a member of the Crown Council myself to Jamaica, Panama, and to Ethiopia as well. And in fact, as Orion earlier mentioned, I was behind a movement called Selassie Stand Up, which lobbied the African Union to build a statue of His Imperial Majesty for really playing a leading role in establishing the Organization of African Unity, which is now called the African Union. The emperor was a stellar diplomat. He was able to reconcile the differences between two opposing factions. He summoned them to Addis Ababa and really served as the de facto leader of the whole continent. And it was on the very same night, in the wee hours of the morning, that they were able to ratify the charter that was then later used as the governing document to establish the Organization of African Unity, which was initially established by money that was allocated from the Ethiopian treasury. So the Ethiopian government provided 100% of the funding for the establishment of the OAU. And the emperor himself really, prior to its establishment, was helping liberation movements, was helping support liberation movements throughout Africa. An interesting fact, and this also ties back to the Battle of Adwa, because one of the outcomes of the Battle of Adwa, the victory, was that it enabled Ethiopia to represent itself in international diplomacy, whereas other African countries who were colonized were represented by European colonialists. So it was the emperor who was going to the League of Nations when Ethiopia was attacked by Italy the second time. And although his plea fell on deaf ears, it was Ethiopia representing itself and the interest of all other Africans as well. And Ethiopia's independence and the victory at the Battle of Adwa is what enabled Ethiopia to remain as an independent nation and as a sovereign independent nation, allowing Emperor Haile Selassie and subsequent leaders to represent themselves in these type of diplomatic circles. And it inspired liberation movements. Nelson Mandela, for example, was trained under the emperor's guidance. He was trained by General Taddessa Birru, who physically trained Nelson Mandela, but it was done with the emperor's, per the emperor's vision. Nelson Mandela was later provided with a handgun and an Ethiopian passport and an alias name that he then used to re-enter South Africa to fight against the apartheid state. Ethiopia and Liberia, for example, filed a suit against the South African government when they encroached upon Namibia and seized its territory. And there are several border disputes within the continent that the Emperor Haile Selassie was able to resolve as well. So I can go on and talking about the emperor, but nonetheless, one of the interesting outcomes of our state visit to Jamaica was the fact that I was able to meet with the Prime Minister of Jamaica, and unlike the 7-year ordeal that I had dealing with the Ethiopian government to also get their buy-in to build a statue of Emperor Haile Selassie in an organization that he essentially, for all intents and purposes, single-handedly made happen, I received a verbal commitment within 20 seconds on the spot from the Prime Minister, who responded to my request of a statue in Jamaica of the emperor being a great idea. He then asked me, well, have you located a place for the statue of the emperor to be built? I said, well, first we wanted Your Excellency's approval, and then our thought was that we would form a council and then choose an optimal place with the approval of the Jamaican government. He said, well, why not National Heroes Park? So there are 7 statues, busts of national heroes, Jamaican national heroes, and we signed an MOU 2 days later that goes beyond just the building of a statue. We're looking to foster and enhance bilateral relations. The MOU was signed between the Crown Council and the government of Jamaica, so we're looking to promote trade, commerce, educational opportunities as well, because the emperor, during his own visit in 1966, fronted money for the building of a high school called Haile Selassie High School, which still exists to this day and is in need of renovation. So we're looking to build upon that, that relationship as well. So as you know, Emperor Haile Selassie is highly revered, not only in the Caribbean, but throughout the world. The emperor, despite the Rastafarian faith, meaning there are Rastafarians who actually believe in the emperor as God. He did build Orthodox churches in the Caribbean. In fact, on my personal visit to Jamaica about 3 or 4 months ago, I was invited to speak at the Ethiopian Orthodox Church there as well. It's the Rastafarians, however, bear the emperor's birth name. So when Ethiopian monarchs are anointed to become kings or queens or emperors or empresses, they're given what can be maybe associated or what's similar to like a baptismal name, but they're renamed. So Haile Selassie means power of the Trinity, but his birth name was Teferi Makonnen, and Ras is a title equivalent to that of a duke. So the Rastafarians actually used his title and then his first name to develop a religion because they believed that the emperor fulfilled the prophecy per the scriptures. And Bob Marley, as you know, was also a Rasta, even though he converted to Orthodoxy later in his life. And as I said earlier, it's because of the interpretation of the prophecy that Rastafarians believe in him as God. Rastafarianism also led to the creation of reggae music. And it can be argued that the prophecy wouldn't have been fulfilled without the victory of the Battle of Adwa by Emperor Menelik, which allowed Emperor Haile Selassie to represent Ethiopia as a sovereign state, as I mentioned earlier, not through European colonial power, as was the case with other African nations. So without Emperor Menelik, really there would be no Emperor Haile Selassie in terms of leadership and coming through the ranks of the Solomonic line to preside over Ethiopia. And without Emperor Haile Selassie, arguably there would not be Rastafarianism because it's specific to the emperor himself, and even reggae, as we know it, for that matter. So the contributions of Ethiopia, particularly through Emperor Menelik and Emperor Haile Selassie, are vast, especially when it comes to Ethiopia's role in international diplomacy. Ethiopia was a big advocate of collective security, an arbiter of peace, be it through the League of Nations. Although the emperor's appeal for peace fell on deaf ears, the United Nations, Ethiopia was a founding member and then very active in terms of its belief and support of collective security efforts throughout the world. So the legacy of Emperor Menelik and his victory at the Battle of Adwa also lived through the persona of Emperor Haile Selassie, who continued it and built upon the efforts and foundation laid by Emperor Menelik. Since the deposition of the monarchy, Ethiopia really hasn't been fortunate to have this type of continuity. So this is also why I'm focusing on this aspect. I think it would be prudent also, given that we're all here in America, to mention that beyond securing its own independence and security, be it through the First Italo-Ethiopian War, be it through the second one, and throughout its history, Ethiopia emerged beyond that and did the same throughout the continent and internationally as well. Emperor Haile Selassie, for example, sent 6,000 of his own imperial bodyguard troops to North Korea. The Ethiopians fought valiantly alongside the U.S. 7th Infantry Division in 253 battles, including the Battle of Pork Chop Hill against Communist China. And there wasn't one Ethiopian that was taken as a prisoner of war. So these type of contributions are seldom spoken, also because we haven't had the fortune of having pro-Ethiopian governments in office since the deposition of the monarchy. So I initially, actually, as I said earlier, was set out to talk in more detail about the Battle of Adwa itself, but I thought the audience here would be better served by a more holistic approach and understanding of Ethiopia in terms of its history, the various religions that thrive within the country. Ethiopians are very religious, God-fearing people. And it was up until 1974 that Christianity existed as a state religion as well. And the one thing I would say about the Battle of Adwa, it's not just the battle itself, right? But it's also it speaks to the brilliance of Emperor Menelik, who was not only a benevolent leader, but also a brilliant military strategist. Ethiopia during the time and leading up to the Battle of Adwa was coming out of the era of the princes. Obviously, I mean, they came out of the era of the princes maybe some 150 years prior. So Emperor Theodorus II actually, who you can say raised Emperor Menelik, even though Emperor Menelik was a captive within his imperial court. He learned also from Emperor Theodorus II, who was able to bring Ethiopia out of the era of the princes, where there were different provincial kings and Ethiopian unity was at risk. So Emperor Menelik really followed along those lines. And then you had the Ottoman Empire. You had the Egyptians, who were, although nominally under the Ottoman Empire, were acting as a quasi-independent entity, supporting Islamic militants, and the sultanates, who also backed and attacked Ethiopia. They also controlled the ports, and they seized the ports north of Ethiopia and Eritrea. So there was a lot of internal fraction or fragmented political structure that Emperor Menelik was able to put together. And essentially, before he became emperor, I think it's fair to say, as king of Shoa, he built an empire. When Emperor Johannes was busy fighting the Italians and also attending to the Mahdists, which was an Islamic dynasty in Sudan, who were also backed by the Brits initially, until they broke away from them and then attacked Ethiopia and were seizing Ethiopian territory. So while Emperor Johannes was busy at the battlefront, Emperor Menelik built an empire which helped him emerge as King of Kings after the death of Emperor Johannes, fighting against the Mahdists in Sudan, or in the northwestern portion of Ethiopia's borders. Emperor Menelik emerged, and then during the time of the Battle of Adwa, it really was in a difficult sell, even though for Emperor Menelik to galvanize and unify the Ethiopians to fight for independence. And after the victory, it's very interesting, that happened in 1896. In 1897, the term Pan-Africanism was coined by black intellectuals in the Western Hemisphere, who looked to Ethiopia as a symbol and beacon of hope and independence. I'm not quite sure Emperor Menelik had in his mind Ethiopians actually don't have the historical legacy of racism, because we've lived as free and independent, proud people. But it is a fact that Emperor Menelik, being an African, inspired other people to fight for their own independence. And so that led to the mobilization and unification of African people. In 1900, there was a Caribbean by the name of Henry Sylvester Williams, who established the first Pan-African Conference in London and invited Emperor Menelik. He also served as Emperor Menelik's aide-de-camp, or ADC, which is really a British term, but it's basically his personal assistant. And so Emperor Menelik was represented by him as a proxy in an international Pan-African conference. And when the Italians attacked the second time, and after the emperor, I brought this point up several times, appealed to the League of Nations and his pleas fell on deaf ears, the emperor actually left Ethiopia, and Ethiopia was attacked by Italy, who built up their military capacity over the 40 years since the defeat of the Battle of Adwa to avenge their loss, and used mustard gas. And Ethiopians also have a Semitic population, and I was talking with some Jewish family and friends of mine, and I said, it's interesting that, in my view, actually, because the Italian War under Mussolini happened in 1935, and since they did use mustard gas on a Semitic population as well, the Holocaust really happened in Ethiopia first before it happened to European Jews. An argument can be made as such, especially given the lineage that traces us all the way back to the Solomonic line. So the emperor was forced to seek refuge in the UK, where he lived for 5 years. But the emperor didn't sit idle. He, through his emissary, Dr. Malaku Bayan, established the Ethiopian World Federation. Dr. Malaku Bayan was a student at Howard University here in DC, and they would issue publications, and they galvanized the African American community to fight for the independence of Ethiopia. So you had African Americans in various cities throughout the US who actually registered their names to fight for Ethiopia. That was later blocked, but there were Tuskegee Airmen who went to Ethiopia. I believe there were about 4 or 5 of them. The most notable is the Brown Condor, John Charles Robinson. These were highly capable, skilled Air Force pilots who helped establish the Ethiopian Air Force and actually fought against the Italians in the Second War against Italy. And so you can see that Ethiopia really is at the center of these type of Pan-African movements, given its ancient history, and the legacy and history around that continues. I mentioned Nelson Mandela being trained in Ethiopia. The emperor also was a huge proponent of education. In fact, he was an emperor, but he also appointed himself as Minister of Education because he believed education was the path. And unfortunately, when Italy came, they targeted Ethiopia's the best and brightest. And you can see really the agents of anti-Ethiopianism, they follow a similar model or tactic or approach. They target the Ethiopian monarchy. Now it's no longer in existence. They continue to disparage it and disparage the name of Emperor Menelik. They even try to carve Emperor Menelik out of the very same victory that he galvanized the people and led to victory. They also target the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, as I touched upon earlier, with the Portuguese trying to, even though they came to aid Ethiopia against the invading Turks or the Ottoman Empire, they were also trying to impose their religious beliefs on a country that had more intricate and elaborate crosses than the European missionaries who tried to come to Ethiopia to indoctrinate us. And so really the legacy around Pan-Africanism continues. It's inspired by the victory at the Battle of Adwa. I can talk forever on Ethiopian history and the legacy of Emperor Menelik and Emperor Haile Selassie, but I think I'm probably I've probably passed my allotted time. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you again for the invitation. And long live the legacy of Emperor Menelik.
We asked Lij Nebyat to take 30 minutes to talk about 3,000 years of history. I think he did a really good job. So thank you again, Lij Nebyat.